Have the rule of law challenges caused European integration to collapse? Given the many challenges to rule of law in the European Union, observers argue that the EU is not able to ensure its own fundamental values. It depends on its basic values being shared and upheld by its member states. It is important that governments and other politicians respect the rule of law. The same is true for judges in the member states. They are responsible for applying national and EU law. If national actors ignore EU standards, the European Union ceases to be a union of law and it cannot fulfill its functions properly. In this perspective, the many controversies around the rule of law in the EU and its enforcement are problematic. They risk the Union's collapse. They refer to how exactly rule of law principles are to be spelled out, to who has the right to enforce their implementation, or to what extent EU law may set standards for the organization of national justice. Disputes are ongoing in member states between national governments, opposition and courts, but also between member states as well as between organs of the EU. For example, the Irish High Court decided that suspects cannot be transferred to Poland because the country fails to ensure the right to a fair trial. Or in 2021, the Polish and Hungarian governments legally challenged the EU before the Court of Justice of the European Union. This was because of the newly established right of the EU to stop the disbursement of EU funds if a member state has deficiencies in the rule of law. At the same time, the European Parliament sued the Commission before the Court of Justice because it did not activate this mechanism in the case of these two countries. There has never been anything like this before. So many struggles, and nevertheless, the measures could not stop rule of law deficiencies in both Poland and Hungary immediately, critics say. Others do not share this view. They argue that the rule of law challenges have not made the European integration project collapse or fail. Instead, they have become a booster for more integration. For example, the Commission has developed a more comprehensive understanding of the rule of law and started to issue new annual rule of law reports. The EU can now freeze EU money if a member state cannot guarantee the rule of law. The Court of Justice of the European Union has issued landmark rulings. They established much more detailed standards of judicial independence and fundamental rights. They also gave the EU more rights to supervise development in member states. These new policy tools and legal and judicial provisions affect all EU member states, not only those in which challenges to the rule of law are deplored. In addition, they have worked effectively. In reaction to rulings of the Court of Justice of the European Union and possible cuts in financial transfers from the EU, the Polish and Hungarian governments have made some improvements to the rule of law. In this perspective, the conceptual and legal approach of the EU to safeguard the rule of law is much more advanced than before the attacks on judicial independence and other elements of the rule of law started in some member states, and it is even more comprehensive. It also includes the protection of independent media, for example, as an element of the rule of law. Have the challenges to the core values of the EU caused European integration to collapse? What do you think?